Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the top 50 teams of the RLCS 2024 season. Today I'm going to be going through the 50 most accomplished teams / organizations of this season. It's the third time that I've done this. I did it for the 2021-22 season as well as the 22-23 season. It was a lot of fun those years, and it was also a lot easier because we had 9 events with 3 LANs and a world championship. I definitely said that wrong, but it's whatever. This year only had 6 open qualifiers, as they say. 2 majors and 1 world championship to work with. I did throw in EWC results in here as well, just kind of as to use as a tiebreaker. But yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Number 50, we have the Los Angeles Signal. This is a roster that I felt like I had to put on here simply due to the fact that they made a final in APAC. I think making a final is, worthy of some praise and should get you on this list, truthfully. And I mean, even if it's an APAC and even if you only played in 2 events and even if your season was very interesting, I think you still deserve to be on here. The best result was against Koshihikari, I believe is how you say that, in open qualifier, that's in the semifinals. It was to make the finals where they would end up losing to the Gladiators. That roster was Lunar, Furlash, and Nye. This was the roster that made a weird decision and kicked Nye after making the finals in APAC, which, listen, I'm not part of the team, but don't ever ask me why they did that. Nye ended up outperforming them in the very next event. You can see the LA Signal got 9th through 11th and promptly did not play in the rest of the events. But because they were at a final, had to throw them in here. They're at number 50. Another team that I felt like deserved a shout, even if they didn't make a final, was the Spagnolia / Nine Lives / Nkosi Ballers. You probably know them best as the Nkosi Ballers, as they performed under that banner at the Esports World Cup. That was a roster of Guns, Cams, and Snoozy. They had multiple top 4s, a couple top 8s, but their most important result was making the Esports World Cup. They did get kind of blanked there, but it was cool of them to be able to represent the SSA region. And yeah, I mean, the first time outside of 2 world championships where SSA was represented with 2 different teams. So definitely a good accomplishment for those players. Number 48, I have Gamer Legion. This one I went with the organization in terms of what I considered to be this team, rather than the 2/3 player rule, especially because once you get into the depths and like this low in South America, every team tends to break up pretty frequently. But for the first split, this was Unbroken, Pan, and Infiero. If you remember, that first split had the Pan Psycho that everyone was talking about as one of the most mechanical shots. But in the second split, they all went their separate ways. Unbroken stayed with the Gamer Legion org and picked up Davasano and Alpe. They also had Lit as a coach. Their best result was 3-2 versus Secret in Open Qualifier 1 Swiss. So they did make 1 top 8, but other than that, didn't do too much. Number 47, I have Ground Zero. This was a consistent top 8 team in OCE. They made 2 top 4s, 1 in Open Qualifier 2 and 1 in Open Qualifier 6. Their best result was beating Power in the Swiss of Open Qualifier 4. This was Prompt, Laxton, and Lunar. At number 46, I have Fivehead / Vision Esports. This was Zazonex, Twiz, and Talm, I believe is how you pronounce his name. They made 1 top 4 in Open Qualifier 2 and then had a little bit of middling results in the MENA region. Their best result was in that quarterfinal that they ended up winning. It was a 4-0 result against Nameless. They didn't end up taking down any of the big dogs throughout the season, but a sweep over a team in the quarterfinals definitely qualifies as this team's best result. At number 45, I have Endpoint. This was Arju, Matean, and Toxic by the end of the season. They started the season out with Smokes. They made 2 top 8s, 1 in Open Qualifier 1 and 1 in Open Qualifier 6. In that Open Qualifier 6, they ended up taking Team BDS to Game 7. And unfortunately, that is their best result. I wanted to find a good quality win for this org, but I think taking the eventual world champions to a Game 7 is probably the best showing that they had. I will also vouch for that Open Qualifier 5. They had to face off against 2 teams that made pretty consistent top 8s in Europe in order to qualify for the main event, and unfortunately, they just couldn't get it done. Granted, a lot of people were distracted by Karma Core missing that event, but I feel like Endpoint kind of got screwed by the bracket in that one to no fault of their own. So, Endpoint, number 45. Number 44, Team 3, I'm begging you to put a logo, please. You have Mark by 8. You are a, honorary world champion. Kalism and Noasaki also round this roster out in the 3rd split. They made multiple top 8s in Europe as well, but since they managed to qualify for every single event, I have them above Endpoint. Their best result was a 3-2 over Oxygen in the Open Qualifier 1 Swiss. Number 43, I have Chapati Dreams / Sailing Esports. This was Baleares, Abs Crazy, and LCT by the end of the season. They started the season with Herrero, but once LCT becomes available, you definitely pick them up. It reunited Abs Crazy and LCT from back when they teamed in 2022. They made a second place in Open Qualifier 1. This was when Gladiators ended up actually losing to this team in that semifinal. They were able to take down Gladiators in Game 7. And other than that, they were a pretty consistent top 4 team throughout APAC. Number 42, I have Timeless/Erased. This was PJ, Luke, and Davitrox. This was the roster that would later get picked up by Loud before being dropped after remarks from Luke ended up surfacing. But in terms of what we saw on the field, can't ignore the fact that they got second place. They took down Furia in Game 7 of the Open Qualifier 6 semifinals. There's a reason they were dropped by Loud, though. I feel bad for PJ and Davitrox, as this was mainly the fault of Luke. But in terms of results, have to have them on here. That second place, as I mentioned, finals are one of the most important parts of this. So, number 41, I have the Firehawk/Astronic Skill Quest. This was a team that I wish I didn't have to have on here as well, mainly because they are one of the Spanish teams that was playing in the SSA region. They were a consistent team there. They made 2 top 8s and then got second twice in a row, and then 2 top 4s. Their best result was a 3-2 win over Limitless in the Open Qualifier 5 Swiss. I did not put their semifinals results on here, as I figured a win over Limitless is probably the most important accolade that you can have in the SSA region. At number 40, I had TSM. This was Wavy Creams and Hockey. You probably know this roster from when they made top 4 in Open Qualifier 3 after taking down M80 in that quarterfinal. That was their best result, but unfortunately, the rest of the season did not really follow that suit. They didn't make another top 8 outside of that, and they ended up missing out on Open Qualifier 6, going out 25th through 32nd. At number 39, I have a young, promising roster from North America. It's the Snowmen. It's Scribbles, Frosty, and Reveal. This team won over a lot of people in their Open Qualifier 4 performance, which their most notable result was taking down Gen G 3-2. They also were able to take down M80 in quarters again to make that top 4 that you see in the Open Qualifier 4. They missed the second event of the season, but considering they are a bunch of rookies and a lot more prolific teams missed that second event, I'm going to kind of lay off them for a little bit. They made every single other event and were pretty consistent performers throughout the Swiss. At number 38, I have W7M. This is another roster where I decided to stick with the organization, as South America is just easy to follow the organizations, as they seem pretty loyal to one person. Like we saw with Gamer Legion, they were pretty loyal to Unbroken. With W7M, they stuck and built around Royales. By the end of the season, they had Pan and Kaio TG1, but they started out with Wisty and Diaz, who you will see pop up later in this list for sure. They made multiple top 8s, as you can see, 4 top 8s here. Made a top 4 in Open Qualifier 2, and then 9th through 11th in the first Open Qualifier. Their best result was a 3-1 victory over Ninjas in Pajamas in the Open Qualifier 6 Swiss stage. At number 37, I have a young, promising team out of the Middle East region. This is Team Iraq. You probably know them if you follow Fear. He was covering this team for a good portion of this season. This is Dr. Known, Ops, and Nush. They failed to make the first 2 events of the season, but once they cracked that bridge out of the double elimination and got into the main event, they made consistent top 8s. They also made multiple top 4s. Their best result was taking down Rule 1 in that Open Qualifier 3 double elimination. This was kind of them announcing their presence onto the stage, saying, okay, we're actually a legit MENA team, and taking down the second best team in the region in order to make their first main event is certainly one way of doing that. At number 36, I have Hero Base. This is Sad, Drops, and Klaus. This is the roster that actually ended up getting picked up by Loud for the Esports World Cup. Their best result was a 4-3 victory against Complexity in the last event of the season. This was part of what eliminated Complexity from the Major 2 contention, which would later eliminate them from Worlds contention. They made multiple top 4s, and their one stain on the record is not making a top 8 in Open Qualifier 2. Other than that, a really solid season from these guys. Number 35, I have Infinity/Bravado Gaming. This is Natter, O Vampires, and Glows. They started out the season with Venom before he ended up getting picked up by that Rule 1/anything roster. They made 2 top 4s when they had Venom on the team in Open Qualifier 1 and Open Qualifier 3, but their most notable result is a 3-0 sweep over Falcons in the Open Qualifier 5 Swiss stage. At number 34, I have M80. And I mean, making consistent top 8s in North America is enough to land you on this list, even if you don't make it any further than that. This is AJ Jorias and Nas. You probably know of this team as the quarterfinals curse. Their best result was, of course, in the Swiss stage. It was a 3-2 victory over G2. One of the only teams to beat G2, and I believe the only non-LAN team to beat G2 this season. Number 33, I have Fearless/R8. This is Suspect, Basil, and Abdullah. I believe it's pronounced Basil. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Their best result was a 4-3 victory over Rule 1 in the quarterfinals of Open Qualifier 4. They made 3 different top 4s throughout the season. Unfortunately, ended on a bit of a sour note, not making it out of the Swiss, but a pretty consistent contender in the Middle East region. At number 32, I have Crew Esports. This team made 3 top 4s in the South American region. Their best result was a 3-2 victory over Secret in the Open Qualifier 6 Swiss stage. This is a roster of AGG, Bems, and Wisty. They had Card for the first split, but once things started to go wrong, they picked up Wisty from that W7M roster and did a lot better. They were in LAN contention up until the last event, where they ended up losing to Secret in that quarterfinals. At number 32, I have Dignitas. This is Arsenal, Gyro, and Stizzy. They had Violet Panda as a coach, and they played with Evo for a couple events out of the season, 4 to be exact. They made 1 top 4 at the beginning of the season, and they ended up beating Pirates on a Boat in that quarterfinal, if I remember correctly. They ended up picking up Stizzy halfway through the season, but when things didn't go quite well in Open Qualifier 4, they ended up benching Evo for Gyro, where they made 2 top 8s after that, including taking Space Station Gaming to a Game 7 in that Open Qualifier 5. The best result was a 3-0 sweep over Luminosity in Open Qualifier 1 Swiss, and I actually believe that they had Luminosity's number pretty much throughout the entire first split, as they were one of their main detriments in trying to stop them from making that major. At number 30, I have Omelette / Cloud9. They failed to make the first event, but after that, it was a lot better. Their worst result after that being a 9th through 11th, but they made 2 top 8s and 1 top 4. They took G2 to Game 7 multiple times throughout the season, and their best result was a 4-2 victory over M80 in the Open Qualifier 5 quarterfinals. Number 29, I have Pirates on a Boat / Moist. This team was able to make every single event in North America, including making multiple top 8s and a top 4. This is Andy 5-Up and Eris, coached by Noah and then Achieves for the first split. Their best result was that 4-2 victory over Gen G in the last event of the season. Number 28, I have Redemption / Resolve. This team was able to make every single event in Europe, but made a top 4 in Open Qualifier 4, taking down the eventual world champions in Team BDS. This was Cash, Ivan, and Raziers, but the Cash and Ivan duo started out with Astral in the beginning of the season. At number 27, I have Moist yet again, but this time it's the Moist Jobless roster. This was Oli, Rezi, and Ixo, but they started out the season with Joyo. They made a top 8 multiple times. They made 3 different top 8s and then 2 top 4s. They ended up missing that Open Qualifier 2, and without missing that, they could have been in a much better chance to make that Copenhagen major. Their best result was in the Open Qualifier 6, where they were able to take down Vitality 4-3. They were jobless at that point, playing with Ixo, so taking down Vitality without Joyo, I mean, all due respect to Ixo, taking down Vitality without Joyo and with Ixo in his place is definitely an accomplishment. Sorry, no shade, Ixo. I did not mean it like that. At number 26, I have Rebellion, 2-Piece, Parth, and Justin, and this is where I start to include a lot more lands in here. You can see that they did not qualify for London, but that is primarily because they lost that tiebreaker to OG. They made a 1 top 4 in the first split, but other than that, didn't do so great. And then in the second split, they were in consideration for that major, making 2 top 8s as well as a final. Their best result was a 3-2 victory over Gen G in the Open Qualifier 6 Swiss, which is part of their run to challenge for that land spot. At number 25, I have Magnifico / Luna Galaxy. This was the Atomic and Tox duo that was 1 place away from making land twice. For the first split, they played with Stizzy, and the second split, they played with Achronic. Their first split, they ended up making a top 4 in the second event, but their second split, they ended up making a final, challenging BDS and taking them to Game 7. The best result was a 4-1 victory over the General Mates in the Open Qualifier 6 quarterfinals. They would take down Jobless in that semifinal in order to make the finals and secure the next up spot for LAN. Unfortunately, Tox just barely can't make that hump. At number 24, I have Ninjas in Pajamas, and I don't think I'm biased when I say that this was the best team to not make a LAN this season. This was actually the only team to win an event and not make a LAN, despite the fact that we only sent 1 representative from APAC and SSA each time. This team won the Open Qualifier 5 event, including taking down Furia 4-1 in that finals. They also made a finals in Open Qualifier 2 and were in contention up until the last day for that Copenhagen major spot. This was Astromix, Swift, and Knight. And if you haven't seen my video detailing their kickoff to keep their season alive, please go watch that. I loved making that video. That was a ton of fun. They ended up failing and making a top 8 in their last event, losing to Furia in that quarterfinals, but I believe they had some internet issues in the Swiss, which allowed them to have a worse seed heading into it. It was really unfortunate we didn't get to see this team on LAN, but I do have them as my best team to not make a LAN this season. At number 23, I have Elevate/XO. You probably know them as Elevate with the Kevin Sphinx and ZPS, or better yet, you probably know them as Kevin Sphinx and LCT, where they attended the Copenhagen Major, ended up going out last in Swiss, but was still cool to see a lot of new APAC talent, specifically Sphinx, on LAN for the first time. They won 3 events throughout the season, that being Open Qualifiers 1, 3, and 4, and they got second in a couple others, one top 4. Had really consistent results, also qualified for EWC with this, but they ended up going out 13th through 16th. At number 22, I have Kaka's Minions/Chiefs. It's important to note that the Kaka's Minions duo was picked up by Chiefs, and that's why I have them here. That duo was Finn and Kaka, but for the second split, they ended up picking up Hunter in place of Super Locky. They made multiple top 4s in OCE, and then in the second split, made 2 finals, which helped qualify them for the London Major. They ended up going out last, or tied for last in the London Major as well, but this helped them qualify for the Esports World Cup. For this event, they ended up subbing in Jorias for Finn after Finn retired, and they ended up making a top 8, which was a huge accomplishment for the entire OCE region. At 21, unfortunately, I do have to have these guys in here. It's Team Mobula. They didn't play in the first split, but they did sweep the SSA region in the second split and went to London just to lose. I'm sorry, I don't have too much nice to say about this team. At number 20, I have Luminosity with Reddle's Magic Cheese. This is what they're known as now. They made 1 final in the season in Open Qualifier 2, and this helped qualify them for the Copenhagen Major. They did surprise a lot of people with their performance in Copenhagen. While they only went out at 9th through 11th, they did challenge Vitality in that last round. Unfortunately, they couldn't get it together for the second split and ended up just missing out on Worlds. At number 19, I have the Twisted Minds roster. This was a duo of SMW and Mawson, but they played with Ahmad for the second split. You probably know this trio from the London Major, where they went out 12th through 14th. They also played with Senzo for the first split, and they played with Napo for the Esports World Cup. This team made multiple finals in MENA and then only made a top 4 in the last event. Unfortunately, Ahmad was just short of qualifying for every single final, and he would have ended up losing every single final if he qualified for that 6th one. This team went out 9th through 12th at the Esports World Cup, losing to both Vitality and Furia when they played with Napo. Unfortunately, this roster claimed 2 of MENA's greats, as they ended up retiring after leaving this team. First Senzo after the first split, and then Ahmad after the second split. At number 18, I have Complexity. This team won an event in South America, which helped propel them to the Copenhagen Major, where they got 9th through 11th. Second split was not so favorable. They made 1 top 4 and 2 top 8s. This was Razebull, CRR, and Diaz by the end of the season. For the first split, they played with Dorito. At number 17, I have Rule 1, or otherwise known as Anything. This team made multiple finals in MENA, 4 to be exact. They also made a top 8 and a top 4 to round out their season. They qualified for the Copenhagen Major, where they went out 12th through 14th. This was when they were under the Rule 1 banner with the roster of Napo, Ahmad, and Khaled. After the first split, Ahmad ended up going to Twisted Minds, and then after the Open Qualifier 4, there was a bit of controversy surrounding Napo. Khaled ended up dipping. Mesho came in as the sub for Rule 1 to replace Ahmad, and they rolled with a roster of Napo, Venom, and Mesho. This team would have qualified for the World Championship based on points, but due to personal reasons, Napo could not attend, so that's why I have that distinction there. At number 16, I have Limitless. This was a roster of Snowy, To Die For, and Sweaty. This was the team out of the Sub-Saharan Africa region to make the World Championship. They ended up going out 0-3 in the Swiss, as they did in Copenhagen as well, but they won the first 3 events of the season and then made multiple finals in the second split. This performance also helped them qualify for the Esports World Cup, where they would go out, unfortunately, in last place as well. At number 15, I have the Gladiators, which is Virtuoso, Maxiu, and Tho by the end of the season. They started out the season with Realize, but once they failed to make the Copenhagen Major, they made a change, got Tho over in from Europe, and they instantly improved. They got second in Open Qualifier 4, and then won both the next 2 Open Qualifiers to help them qualify for the London Major. At the London Major, they got APAC's first series win at a major, taking down the Chiefs, and then they ended up going 12th through 14th. This also helped them qualify for the Esports World Cup, where they would go out 13th through 16th as well. And the Worlds, they unfortunately did not have a good run, went 0-3 through the Swiss to get last. At number 14, I have a new fan favorite in the KC Pioneers. I don't believe it's KC anymore, but they're kind of stuck in my head like that. This was Amphis Fibered Super Locky for the end of the season. They had a bit of an interesting situation where they subbed in Mach for that Open Qualifier 6, but we'll get to that in just a second. They qualified for the Copenhagen Major by getting to 2 finals in the OCE region. This was enough as Power was dominating that region. But in Copenhagen, they went out 12th through 14th, taking down Elevate in the Swiss. Second split didn't go so well as they made 2 top 4s and it was looking a little bit dire for them. So they subbed out Fiber and subbed in their coach Mock. This helped them get to the final, which wasn't enough to qualify for London, but would be enough to help them qualify for the World Championship. During that 3-month break between the Open Qualifier 6 and Worlds, they decided to sub back in Fiber, and he put on a masterclass at the World Championship where he was able to help take down Gen G and land this team in 9th through 11th. At number 13, I have Team Secret. This team was KV1, Mata, and Brad. They couldn't make it past the quarterfinals in the first split, but in the second split, they decided to stick it out and had much more success. They got second in their first event back, and then in Open Qualifier 5, got taken down by Ninjas in Pajamas to make top 4. However, in Open Qualifier 6, they went on a miracle run that got them into winning that event. It actually tied them on points for the split with Furia. They went to the London Major and got 9th through 11th there, including taking down OG. At the Esports World Cup, they got 9th through 12th, and then at Worlds, they got 12th through 14th. At number 12, we have OG. This is JNaps, Nolly, and Com. And I know there's a lot of disappointment around this roster as they were kind of an underperforming North American roster, but the results do speak for themselves compared to the rest of the field. I know I just mentioned the Secret took down OG at the London Major, but OG was consistent and did make all 3 international competitions. This team made multiple top 4s in the North America circuit. They made 4 to be exact. They ended up going out last in the first Swiss, but after that turned their season right around. Turning it around was able to help them qualify for Copenhagen and London, where they went out 12th through 14th. And then unfortunately at Worlds, the same thing befell them, and they went out 1-3. It was a much more impressive or a much more solid resume with their 1-3 performance at Worlds, but it was still disappointing for them to land in the same spot. At number 11, I have Oxygen, and I think if Rule 1 had been able to go to that World Championship, or I guess they were anything at that point. If they had been able to go to Worlds, this team would certainly not be that high. This team was Archie, Oski, and Joyo. They picked up Joyo for the second split. In the first split, they ended up playing with Ixo. They made a top 4 in that first split where Ixo ended up having an iconic interview saying that he didn't care what the fans think. But unfortunately, he was the player to go from this roster as it's hard to pass up a player like Joyo. Joyo helped them take down Chromicor in Open Qualifier 4 to make top 4. They made a final in Open Qualifier 5, and then the top 8 was still enough to help them make the London Major. At this major, they went out 9th through 11th, being the first team out of EU to fail to make it out of Swiss for the season. However, this was enough to propel them into the EU5 seed, and when no other teams out of MENA could make the World Championship for the MENA 2 seed, Oxygen got invited. With one last chance at life, this team actually made a miracle run, including taking down the defending world champions to knock them out of the World Championship, and they ended up going out top 6. At number 10, I have Space Station Gaming. This was a team that was a little bit gate-kept for the first split by Gen G. They ended up going out in the quarterfinals 3 times in a row. But for Open Qualifier 4, when they finally got a different quarterfinal opponent, they were able to make it past there and get to the semifinals where they made top 4. They got to a final and almost actually won that event before getting taken down eventually by G2 in Game 7. But they were able to use that to qualify for the London Major, where they would get top 8. This performance also helped them qualify for the Esports World Cup, where they got top 8. And then at Worlds, they also got top 8. This roster for the entire season was LJ Hoxer in Chicago. At number 9, I have Carmine Core. This team was very difficult to rank as they are, without a doubt, the highest team that I have on here that failed to make an Open Qualifier. This team, however, did sweep the online portion of the first split, winning all 3 of those events. They qualified for Copenhagen and then went out top 4. The second split, as you can see, a lot more disastrous where they ended up not qualifying for London or the Esports World Cup. However, they used this time to regain and qualify for Worlds. Well, they had already qualified, but they went to Worlds and got top 4. This roster was Vatira, Rise, and Atao. And Farah. Farah is actually a very important part to mention to this roster. Farah is a great coach. At number 8, I have Power, and it probably feels a little weird to have a team that couldn't get past 9th through 11th internationally in the 8th spot. But considering this roster consistently made lands and made 9th through 11th every single time in RLCS lands, they got to be on here. They also swept the OCE region, winning a perfect 6 out of 6 Open Qualifiers. So really hard to ignore those statistics. They went 2 and 3 through Swiss multiple times, and some of their big upsets include taking down Oxygen and Gen G. This was the roster of Banana Head, Fever, and Torsauce. And Jimma. Jimma's also a good coach. At number 7, I have Gen G, and of course the World's performance makes this roster very difficult to rank. This was apparently Jack, Chronic, and First Killer. For the first split, they had Illusion as coach. In the second split, they had Chrome as a coach. And I know there's a lot of conversation going around that, but this is not the video to talk about that. They ended up winning 2 events in North America, that being Open Qualifiers 3 and 4. They made the finals in Open Qualifier 1. This helped them qualify for the Copenhagen Major, where they made a top 8. Their performance in the second split also qualified them for the London Major, where they also made top 8. Their Esports World Cup was their best event of the season, arguably, where they made top 4, taking down Vitality in a sweep. But at the World Championship, things started to really fall apart, where they lost to both OCE teams and went out 12th through 14th. At number 6, I have Team Vitality. This was Alpha 54, Radosin, and Zen, the defending world champions heading into this season. They did end up winning one event after sweeping the entirety of the last split of the last season. However, they didn't start out that way. They did enough to qualify for the first major, where they went out top 4, losing in a Game 7 overtime to G2 to barely miss out on that final. They bounced back from that by winning the Open Qualifier 4, which helped them qualify for the London Major. Here they went out top 8, but there is a little bit of stipulation with Radosin being sick for that event. Esports World Cup, however, was where the warning signs were when they ended up getting swept by Gen G. And then at Worlds, they promptly took some losses they arguably shouldn't be taking, including losing to Oxygen and Space Station Gaming to go out in the Swiss 9th through 11th. We're into our top 5, and at number 5, we have Furia. This is Jan, Lost, and Drufinio. This team won 3 different events in the South American region, made 2 finals beyond that, and then got eliminated top 4 in their last event. At the Copenhagen Major, they made a top 8 after going 3-0 through the Swiss. But in London, they were able to do the opposite, where they took down Vitality, who went 3-0 through the Swiss, to make a top 4. At the Esports World Cup, this team got top 8 as well, but at the World Championship, they were able to get a top 6 using that new AFL-style format. At number 4, we have Falcons. This team swept the Middle Eastern region, winning a perfect 6-for-6 events as well. At Copenhagen Major, they ended up going out top 8 after losing a nail-biter to Carmine Core. But at the London Major, they really regained, making it to the finals and losing to G2 there. At the Esports World Cup, they also made the finals on home soil, but ended up losing that to Team BDS. And unfortunately, they couldn't repeat their finals appearance at the World Championship. They ended up losing to Team BDS before making it there in that top 4 spot. This season, we had 3 different major winners, and that's why you see your first one heading in at number 3. This is the Gentlemates. They ended up getting second in their first event as a team with the quote-unquote floater from heaven, as teammates like to call it. This led to them being slept on for most of the rest of the split, as they only made quarterfinals in the next 2 events. However, all those rumors were dispelled when they ended up winning the Copenhagen Major out of quite literally nowhere. I believe some computers or projections had them with a 2% chance to win that major heading into it. This garnered them a lot of respect, and even though their second split online was pretty similar looking to their first split online, they were anticipated to do pretty well at the London Major, and they did, only losing in a Game 7 overtime to just barely miss out on the finals, going out top 4. Their Esports World Cup performance was a little bit disappointing, where they ended up losing to the Chiefs twice, and at Worlds, they ended up going out top 8, losing to that Dark Horse Oxygen squad. At number 2, I have G2 Stride, and this was something that I really considered actually putting them at number 1. This team was dominant in North America, making every single final. Actually, they didn't make every single final in North America. They made every single final that they genuinely could have with their starting roster. Their only non-final appearance was in the Esports World Cup when they were playing with NAS instead of Beast Mode. This team won the London Major, got second at Copenhagen, and got second at Worlds. And the previous 2 years that I've done this, I've had the World Championship winning team as number 1, and this was the first time I genuinely considered putting the team that won Worlds not in the number 1 spot. However, the main tiebreaker to have Team PDS at number 1 was the fact that they won the Esports World Cup. That might be a little bit lame to some people, I get it, but 2 LAN wins, even if one of them's not an RLCS LAN win, does kind of count for something. This team won 2 different regionals in the EU region, made top 8 in every single other event that they could. Their 2 major performances were a little bit disappointing, going out top 8 at Copenhagen and London. However, once they figured it out, it clicked, and they were able to win, as I mentioned, the Esports World Cup and the World Championship. So that's all. That's the 50 most successful teams. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you have teams higher or lower than me. Always curious to hear how you guys, rank different teams in difference. I really value LAN appearances as well as LAN results prior to, regional wins or regional finals appearances, etc. Once you get into the weeds of, 30 through 50, it definitely gets interesting trying to rank the teams. However, it could be a little bit clearer cut once you get to the top, but I do feel like there's going to be some controversy around that G2 versus BDS, who was the most successful team of the entire season. So hope you all enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys next time.